I'm Brandie Nonnecke, director of the CITRIS Policy Lab and an associate research professor at the Goldman School of Public Policy. I'm also the host of a audio and video series called TecHype, where we debunk misunderstandings around emerging technologies and the laws and policies that shape them. This is part 3 of 4 of our Science Communication and Policy Impact Workshop series. We do want to remind everybody about the last workshop that will be coming up on Friday, November 15th. That workshop will focus on engaging with legislative and regulatory processes. So if you've ever received a request to review a piece of legislation, a bill, we're going to teach you how do you do that effectively? How do you redline it? What are the types of comments and actions that are most useful for that member of Congress or legislature? And then also providing comments during regulatory processes. So this could also include commenting on a notice of proposed rulemaking, where an agency actually has authority to implement rules like the Federal Trade Commission, or it could be like NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which sets overall guidance. They often will do requests for comments or requests for information from domain experts to help guide their work. And so we will walk you through how do you do that effectively. You can register for the workshop there on the screen. You can see the URL. A reminder, the CITRIS Policy Lab does provide broader impacts support for researchers. We can help you develop appropriate policy recommendations for both the public and private sector, help you strategize appropriate methods to communicate your research and policy recommendations. We can even assist you in writing policy memos and briefs, which is something that we will do in today's workshop, and assist you in developing white papers, op-eds, one-pagers, slide decks, materials that can help you more effectively communicate your research to a broader audience. So if you are interested in getting any support, you can check out our website at citrispolicylab.org, or you can go ahead and email me directly. My email is included on the slide. I mentioned the show, TecHype. It's the audio and video series where we debunk misunderstandings around emerging technologies and the laws and policies that shape them. One of our most popular pieces of content is our TecHype TLDRs, Too Long Didn't Read, where we analyze and summarize bills that have been passed into law, executive orders, all the, legal, jargony things that most people don't want to read, but they want to understand what are the actual impacts of this on our lives, on the public sector, private sector, and we've got you. So I hope that you will check out our episodes at techhype.org. Another exciting thing that will be shared very soon, the CITRIS Policy Lab will release our Broader Impacts Toolkit. So this will be a guide for you on how do you strategize the broader impacts of your research, especially for public policy implications. The toolkit will also include worksheets, how-tos to really guide you and make it simple and easy for you to do that work. A little bit of housekeeping. Please put your questions into the chat. And you can do this throughout the presentation. We can stop. We're a small group today, so we can definitely just take a little pause and answer those questions. And if you see somebody else's question that you also have, go ahead and upvote that question by giving it a thumbs up. Just hover over the little smile icon and you'll see that thumbs up to select it. Today is workshop 3, Pitching the President, Providing Effective Guidance to Policymakers, and a writing workshop. Obviously, this week was the presidential election. We will have a new administration coming in January, a Trump second term. I've written an op-ed that should be published soon that talks about what will the tech policy landscape look like under a second Trump administration. So I hope that you will all check that out. I'll share it throughout my socials, but it's, an opportunity for us to be able to implement some policy changes. During the first Trump administration, there was actually a lot of progress made in the space of tech governance. So I think, as we mentioned in the last workshop, there's these policy opportunities, and a new administration always presents a new opportunity. Workshop 3 is divided into 3 parts. Part 1, I'm going to go over impactful policy deliverables. What are the types of materials you can create? How do you create them? How do you get them into the hands of what we call power players within your network? Essentially, those who can make decisions, can act on your policy proposal. The second part, we're going to be working on writing an effective policy memo and how to submit that to the Federation of American Scientists Day One Project. All of you are invited to submit a proposal for a policy memo to the Day One Project, and we will go over that today. I'll show you the form and how to submit everything. And part 3, in the breakout rooms, you'll actually go through that process of putting together just a very rough draft outline of your policy memo and the materials that you will need to submit to the FAS Day One Project. Policy broader impacts. I mean, oftentimes when we think about broader impacts, especially as academic researchers, and I'm guessing quite a few of you are academic researchers, we often think of our broader impact strategies as centered around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, which is definitely considered a broader impact in those proposals. However, the federal agencies, as NSF, NIH, Department of Energy, they also include public policy as being a broader impact. So when you're thinking about your research, you want to think about how can this work inform public policy and decision making? How could it also contribute to public understanding of science and technology? How can it enhance public safety, health, and well-being? And also promote the responsible use of technology and address those ethical considerations. But how do you do that translation, right? How do you think about your research and its impact in the policy realm? I'm going to tell you that mapping your policy stakeholders, or what we also call your power players, is critical to this. You want to identify government agencies, legislators, regulatory bodies, industry, civil society organizations, community organizations that are interested in or affected by your research topic, and you really need to talk with them. Oftentimes as researchers, we will do our research, we find our results, we take that work forward, publish it in our peer-reviewed journal. But the next step is thinking, how can I actually affect change with this research? And the way that you do that is very dependent on the stakeholder or your power player and what their needs are and how they can act on your problem. A second approach is you can connect your work to existing policy strategies. How does your research align with current laws or bills that have been proposed? For example, if you are researching implementation of safety controls on significantly advanced frontier models, it would be really important for you to connect with Senator Scott Wiener, who wrote SB 1047, which was a contentious bill in California that sought to implement safety guardrails for these frontier models. So it's kind of keeping tabs on, where the policy space is moving and how you can give your work to those individuals and they can act on it. And then also thinking about the long-term societal benefits of your research, how your research can support sustainability, equity, or resilience in society. And if you see here, each of these, there are departments or agencies within government that deal with that, like NIH or the Department of Transportation or Information Technology, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. So there are definitely those power players you would need to be connecting with to identify ways to affect change with your research. When you want to think about translating your research, you want to think about your policy mission. And your policy mission is the really high level thing that you wish to change in the world. What overarching thing do you wish your power players or institutions would change in order to make a difference? For example, we might say we want to make AI more equitable. We want to make AI more accountable. But it can also be a little bit more specific. You can say, I want to make AI fair in human resource applications. So that's your overarching thing. It's pretty big. It's, a really pie in the sky idea. Now you want to move down to your policy goal, and you're getting more and more tailored down to where you can actually develop a policy problem statement that you can act on. So your policy goal is a subset of your mission. It's the concrete thing you hope to achieve within the bounds of your mission. So for the example on AI and HR, it might be to reduce bias in HR tools used to screen resumes in big tech companies. So you can see you're already getting more narrow, and by getting more narrow, you're able to actually implement something that can change. One thing that's really important when you're thinking about your problem statement, right, is if our goal is we want to reduce bias in HR tools used to screen resumes in big tech companies, we don't want to accidentally do solutioning. Now, solutioning is where you already bake your solution into your problem statement, and that will actually be a constraint on you in your creative thinking. The power players around you who deal with this problem, they're going to have other ideas, and they'll know different ways for you to solve that problem better, right? It might not be that the HR tool itself with AI is biased. It could be the institution itself is only marketing its jobs to certain, listservs, which tend to have only certain types of people, right? So it's talking to your power players to better understand what's really going on in this space and how might I best address my goal in that mission. So if we think about the problem statement, we might want to say, like, our policy goal was to reduce bias in HR tools by improving technical mechanisms for detecting and correcting bias data before deployment. Now, see, you're already embedding that solution, right? We're saying technical mechanisms, but it really could be something else, like I had mentioned. So then we would move to the problem statement, which I'm actually going to it's coming up. But we're going to talk about the policy problem, and each of you will actually draft your own policy problem. But I want to walk through this policy impact process. There's essentially two tracks. You have your ideas track and your action track. Your ideas track is where you try to define the problem that you want to address. Perhaps it's lowering emissions or ensuring equitable access to the internet in urban areas. You research the problem, which all of you, I'm very certain, have done. And you next want to be able to identify at least one solution that can be implemented. But this entire time, you have to be crossing over to that action track and working with your stakeholders or what we call power players to make sure, am I defining the problem accurately? When I've researched it, is the research inclusive of all of the constraints and opportunities around this problem? Check your solution with those power players, the stakeholders. Does this make sense? Can this actually be implemented within your organization? If it can be implemented, how do we get it to happen? And then after that, you would develop your outputs to address that solution. Really, it's all about making it so incredibly easy for your power player to act on your solution that for them, it's a no-brainer. They've got all the materials, you've given it to them, you've done your research, you've engaged with them, you package it and give it to them. It's just too easy. They really want to implement it. A not good approach would be to just raise problems to your power player without a potential solution and actual tangible products, right? Because then they're just going to say, yes, this is a problem and we don't know how to deal with it. And that obviously is quite frustrating. So it's about you doing the work for your power players so that they can act on it and be an ally in you achieving your goal. When we think about the policy outputs, there's really two types. There's solutions-oriented outputs and advocacy-oriented outputs. A solutions-oriented output really seeks to solve the problem. So, for example, it might be putting in language in draft legislation. I'll give an example of myself. the California Consumer Privacy Act and the California Privacy Rights Act, I was invited very early on in the development to review the proposition. And when I was reviewing it at the time, I was very concerned about platforms restricting access to data for research purposes under the guise of they don't want to release private information. Legitimate concern. I absolutely agree. But there are mechanisms for providing data to third parties that is privacy preserving. And in the legislation, I actually wrote in language that said, the data that platforms hold can be made available to third parties for public interest research. And that ended up in the final law that we have today. So you can actually affect change. That's one of my only examples where it was effective, but I'm very, very proud of the work that we all did and actually got into it. The second, you could develop, for example, an operational plan for an organization. How would they actually implement this? Let's say later on today, I'll show you an example of a policy memo about onboarding new federal employees during a change in administration, especially people from the tech sector and other areas. Develop a plan for the agency. Say, phase one, you can, solicit comments, do this. Phase two, you do this. Phase three, you do this. Again, it's always about making it so incredibly easy for your power player that they have no choice but to implement it. At the last workshop, we had emphasized really the power of the purse. It's true. Like if you don't have the funding or you can't identify the cost savings that your solution brings, it's difficult for it to actually be implemented in practice. So you want to always think about what are the financial constraints around the implementation of my policy goal, and how can we implement that? How can we best ensure and demonstrate that there's cost savings or that there is funding available to support this over time? The other type of policy output would be advocacy oriented. This is where you're going to want to convince others to adopt it. So for example, op-eds. Op-eds are a really good example of this, right? We write op-eds to raise awareness about an issue so that people understand this significant challenge and what should be done. You could do a letter writing campaign encouraging others to write their member of Congress or the legislature, or even, a public campaign naming and shaming a big tech company that has done something wrong. You can also participate in public hearings, which are always on the record and made public as a very effective form of advocacy. So what are some of the essential components of policy broader impacts? First, relevance, right? If you're working with a power player, you have to demonstrate what is the relevance of this problem and my solution to you. Clearly articulate how that research that you have done, your expertise, how does it address that challenge? Next is targeted outcome or outcomes. You want to specify the policy outcomes. Do you want to influence a bill's language? Do you want to influence regulations? Do you want your power player to adopt your strategy? And it's really always thinking about how. How do they do it? How do they act on it? And then achieve that outcome. Tied to that outcome is measurable impact or impacts. You want to provide a framework for assessing the impact of your targeted outcome. For example, you could say, here's a real example. We provide comments to NIST, to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, every time they have a request for information. Those comments then get cited in their work later. That's a big win for us because now we know that they have read our recommendations, they've read our comments, and have taken them into account as they navigate the AI governance space. So for us, that's a strong measurable impact of our advocacy work, where we want them to understand the issues more. And then last, the collaboration with your power players, that's incredibly important. You want to do sort of a stakeholder mapping of who are the power players, what are their capabilities, what are their constraints, what are their incentives, what are their goals, and how are they aligned or misaligned with your goal. And always, always, always in your policy work, you have to remember BLUF, bottom line up front. Get to the point right away. In academic writing, we do the reverse, right? We start at this big, broad, this is the state of the problem of what I'm studying. Here's my literature review. Here's my methodology. Here's my results, conclusion, and maybe recommendations for more research. You have to flip it in your policy work. It always has to be bottom line up front. What did the research find and what do we do to act on it? And then later, you can put more of that information, more of that background. And I'll describe the difference very shortly between a policy memo and a policy brief. Policy memo, it's pithy, it's short, it's bottom line up front, executive summary, what do you do, conclusion. A policy brief is longer. So a policy brief would include, again, bottom line up front, what do you do? But it's going to include additional research. Oftentimes it'll do like a cost benefit analysis of different solutions to your policy problem. So for the Day One project, you will be submitting a policy memo, which is that short, pithy 1 to 2 pages, very, very clean. So here I just mentioned the difference between policy memos and briefs. Those are solution-oriented, right? In your policy memo and brief, you want your power player to act on your recommendation. Policy memo, 1 to 2 pages, very short, evidence-based document. Just target your specific policy challenge and offer actionable recommendations or solutions, right? What do they need to do today to deal with that problem? A policy brief, as I mentioned, is much longer. It's over 2 pages. It still uses, again, that bottom line up front, but there will be supplemental materials that describe the cost-benefit analysis and why some solutions won't work and why your solution will work. Advocacy-oriented policy deliverables, you could do testimony, right? Presenting your research findings to legislative bodies or advisory councils. A white paper, which is actually a very helpful tool for building up the awareness of the research of your organization. It provides in-depth report. You can outline the policy implications of your research and really get this in the hand of those target power players. Workshops and briefings, organizing events with policymakers to discuss your research and its implications. This is such an important service for researchers. Members of Congress and members of legislatures, they are dealing with so many issues every day. I once heard from an assembly member in California that they had to vote on 90 different bills in one day. 90 across, probably 90 different topics, right? They're dealing with just so much information all the time. So these workshops and briefings can help them kind of cut through the hype around something, how the media is covering it, and help them better understand what they're trying to deal with, what they need to make decisions on. Oftentimes, those workshops and briefings will be attended by the staffers and not necessarily the elected official. And that is actually a benefit. Staffers are your best friend. The staffers are the people who are synthesizing the information and getting it in front of the eyes of the lawmaker. So think of them as really one of the most important power players, not necessarily the person who has been elected into office. And then we've already talked about op-eds, right? You can use those to just inform the public about the nature of the problem and how it can be addressed. So one thing I want to do right now, since we are a smaller group today, I would love for somebody to volunteer and tell me what their policy mission might be, and then their goal and a problem statement. As you're all starting to think right now, let me remind you of the one I shared earlier. So earlier I shared the idea of our policy mission being make AI fair, right? That's broad. Make AI fair where? How? We want to narrow it down. So our goal is a subset of that mission. It's the concrete thing you hope to achieve within the bounds of your mission. So, for example, it could be make AI more fair in HR hiring tools. Okay. And then your problem statement could be to reduce bias in HR tools by detecting and correcting bias before their use. Okay, so I'm going to pause and let's see if somebody wants to volunteer to talk about their policy mission and then goal. You can hold off on your problem statement for right now. Let's just start at the high level, mission and goal. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Marina Shihei from Pueblo of Zia in northern New Mexico. So my policy mission is to create a partnered regulatory environment within native sovereign nations to the U.S. innovation economy, to bring onshore some of the opportunities that have left the U.S. and also to increase our digital economy potentials and strengthen rural U.S. employment.
Awesome. So I'd say your mission is to increase the digital economy for those communities.
Is to create a partnership environment for the U.S. innovation economy within native sovereign nations.
Okay, I love this. You're doing a little bit of solutioning, saying that the partnership is what is going to enable, which probably it is, but try not to do solutioning at this stage yet.
Okay.
Right. So it's strengthening the digital economy for these rural sovereign nations.
Yeah, for native sovereign nations.
Native sovereign nations. Okay. Love it. Thank you so much for volunteering.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I see your little, I have a little too.
It's a snow day. It's a snow day in New Mexico. I hear it's warm everywhere else, but we were having a snow day. So
that's good. That's shocking. I wouldn't think of that, but yeah. All right. So actually, let's move on though to how do you define your policy problem? And Marina, we'll keep working with you since you have kindly volunteered. So we can say, when you think about your policy problem, it's filling in the blanks on this question. How can we insert a qualifier such as more efficiently, equitably, rapidly achieve our policy goal? So for you, it sounds like, how can we more efficiently encourage the development of a digital economy in these sovereign nations?
So I actually think the opportunity is to create regulatory partnerships between the U.S. and native sovereign nations within our government-to-government relationships.
Okay, that's good. It is solutioning, right? Because there could be other strategies. So can you reframe your policy problem statement without solutioning, right? You're saying that those collaborations are needed. You very well might get to that point, but it has to be really high level at this stage.
Sure. So how can we create cyber sovereign environments or digital economies that are specific to native sovereign nations?
Perfect.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's perfect. And you want to keep it really broad at this stage because also you don't want to inadvertently not think of certain power players, right? Because there could be others like the tech companies themselves, institutions of education in those areas, local business like chamber business, like investing in local startups. Awesome. Thank you so much. So I did one too here, and mine was, how can we effectively mitigate malicious deepfakes before an election? And this I actually worked on a few years ago, back in 2019. And my goal was advocacy oriented. I wanted to communicate to the public the nature of this problem and why the current laws that were in place just were not fit for purpose and would not be effective. I know that staffers often look at outlets like Wired or Tech Policy Press or, the big mainstream media outlets. And I knew that the staffers for the individual who wrote that bill that was passed into law would read the piece, and they did. And we had a conversation after it. And so I wrote this piece in Wired about California's anti-deepfake law. And I achieved my desired effect of informing the public, making sure other states didn't adopt California's law thinking that it would be effective, which it wasn't. And I'm happy that other states didn't adopt the same language that was used in the first anti-deepfake law. Okay, when we're thinking about our policy problem, you really need to think about the power players that are affected by or affect that problem. So you can think about the players experiencing your problem, players whose buy-in you need to solve your problem, and players with deep factual knowledge about your problem. So what does this look like? Let's make it a little bit more concrete. Well, it could be decision makers who decide on adopting or deploying your solution. You can think also about, again, the power of the purse, the buyers or payers who transact and disperse resources related to your solution. I cannot express to you how often bills that are passed into law, there's appropriation in a bill, right, where it says, we will appropriate that NIST will receive $30 million to support these AI research hubs. That does not mean that the $30 million will be given to them. So even though it's appropriated, it just says, look, we have this pocket of $30 million and we give approval that it could be used in this space. That doesn't mean it's been allocated yet. And that's a whole nother political process. But the money part of all of this is unfortunately like a big part of how you get your solution across the board or whatever, across the line. The next archetype, you want to think about the saboteurs, right? Who among the power players will resist or push back against your solution? And how might you get them to turn and become an ally instead of a saboteur? Now, the last are influencers. Those can be really impactful people in the space, thought leaders who have that, reputational clout to be a leader in the space. And, they can shape opinion publicly and perception around your solution. On this slide, this is just an example of how you can actually start to map out your power players. And I just gave this as an example from the California anti-deepfake law. You can see the color coding, the lightest blue are the people who experience your problem, the middle stakeholders whose buy-in you need to solve your problem, and then the darker blue are those experts with deep factual knowledge about your problem. And I've split mine up into sort of two groups. The lawmakers, right? They were my target, was to communicate with those staffers for, state legislatures and Congress to make sure that the shortcomings of the California anti-deepfake law were picked up and then passed into law at the federal level or in other states. Then I wanted to think about the broader ecosystem. Who do I need to interact with to understand the nature of the problem and the potential solution? Well, of course, academic researchers who study the spread of malicious deepfakes before an election, what are the social effects of that, economic effects, what are some technical strategies we can implement? And then also thinking about the engineering teams and the C-suite within those companies, right? They're the ones who are going to actually implement some of the technical safeguards, or the C-suite setting the tone for how they're going to be reporting and monitoring the spread of malicious deepfakes in alignment with the law. And of course, at the center is the public, everybody who's experiencing this problem. The slide deck, I will make it available via Google Drive so that you all can actually make a copy of it and make your own stakeholder map using this template. Your goal is always, always, always to make your outputs as helpful as possible to your power players, even the saboteurs. I have somebody who raised their hand. Go ahead. Is it Minar?
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to ask on the previous slide, in what instances do you feel like your engineering teams and C-suite might actually end up being your opposition? And how would you go about finding supporters that, whose buy-in you need as well? So other stakeholders whose buy-in you need in order to get something like this over the finish line. And I'm thinking like the recent AI bill in California that eventually was vetoed, right? There was a lot of opposition, but also some support. So the tech company itself may just not have a vested interest in moving something like this forward.
Yeah, exactly. So they could be a saboteur. The engineering team in the C-suite could be the saboteur saying, look, we don't have the technical capabilities now to identify and mitigate the spread of malicious deepfakes before an election. If we talk about that. Well, what I would do, I'd go back to my academic researchers, those who have deep factual knowledge about this, and ask them, what are some of the mechanisms that can be implemented? All right, they have an incentive to say we can't act on this, right? Because it cost them money. I get it. So then you put pressure back. So if the engineering team says, no, we can't do this, then you take your findings from the academic research and you present that to the staffers and say, look, we think that there are technical mechanisms that can be implemented, and the engineering teams within these companies are essentially just saying they can't do it because it's costly, time consuming, whatever.
Thanks.
Yeah, which that would change your deliverable, right? So if you think too, like if your engineering team in C-suite is not a saboteur and they are actually on board that they want to mitigate the spread of malicious deepfakes before an election, my final output might be guidance on how to detect deepfake content. We have a very famous researcher at UC Berkeley, Professor Hani Farid, who does work in this space on identifying deepfake images and video. And so like connecting his research with those teams to say, look, this is the methodology that you can implement, if they were not saboteurs. So it's really important to always think about your power players. Are they an ally? Are they a saboteur? How do you get them to become an ally? And what are the most effective, most helpful deliverables that will get them to act on your solution? Okay, any other questions? No. Okay. For a policy memo, this is the typical structure. So you'll have like one paragraph at the beginning, that's your executive summary. Often the nature of how we write, we still put one or two sentences at the beginning of why this is a problem, why we need to act on it, right? It catches people's attention, especially if you can tie it back to, like their district, their state, something that they are facing. So typically be like, our crumbling water infrastructure is causing, I'm making this up, it's poisoning water for these at-risk communities within your state. To address this, we need to do X, Y, and Z, right? That's right at the executive summary. Then you want to outline, well, what are some of the challenges and opportunities? So what are the challenges of implementing this solution? Well, it's going to cost a lot of money. Well, what are some of the opportunities? An opportunity might be, look, we know that on this one road, they're already going to be digging and fixing the road. So that is an opportunity. The road's already going to be open. The pipes are there. We can go in, dig once, as they call it in these areas. You dig once and you can actually lay the new road, put in internet, like fiber optic cable, put in the pipes and fix it. So balancing those challenges and opportunities. Then I already started to get to that plan of action. What do you do? Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And then your conclusion is very short, ties a bow around it. Why does this all matter? Essentially, why do you need to act on this right now? You've got to do it. It's a problem. Here, we've outlined the solution for you. Now's the time. So I'm going to show an example here of a day one policy memo. And this is written by two of my dear colleagues who run the Aspen Tech Policy Hub, my sister and Betsy Cooper. And here you can see this first paragraph, right? The executive summary. They outline, why does this matter? What's going on? Current hiring processes, they're opaque, they're problematic. And so what do we do? By serving as a one-stop shop, we need this like public jobs board, and that will diversify appointee workforce. It's going to streamline everything. So in that one first paragraph, you have everything you need to get that power player to bite. Then you can go through the challenges and opportunity, and then outline what's the plan of action? What do we actually need to do to address this? And you can see the plan of action continued, where they also did phase one, do this, phase two, do this, phase three, it goes on. I've just cut it here. And then their conclusion. So I would like to have some more volunteers. If anybody would like to discuss their policy problem and give it a go. Remember, you can think about your policy mission, your work. What are you trying to achieve? What is your goal? And then what is that problem, policy problem? All right, if you don't want to say it aloud, you can put it in the chat. So we'll just wait a minute or two while you all do that. Hey, anybody going to share their idea? It's a really good opportunity to shop your idea around.
Personally, I'm not there yet, but thank you.
Was that Caitlin? Hey, Caitlin, thank you for talking. What kind of research do you do?
Well, so actually, I do federal relations and research development for a nonprofit science organization. So really, I'm very interested in the broader impacts type stuff, but also encouraging our scientists to think about what types of memos or op-eds or other policy related documents they can create and share.
Mm-hmm.
While I have my own personal not related to my current job policy, there isn't anything, at the forefront. A lot of this is like information that I will be passing on to scientists so that they can think about this in their work.
Yeah, but we can also use that as an example. So how can your organization more effectively encourage your researchers to produce policy deliverables?
That's great. So, and actually it's interesting because this has only just come up in the last weeks that we've been talking about our organization's impact. And I have been speaking with leadership about the fact that a lot of our scientists have been cited in policy documents,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of them don't even realize that and don't know that. And our board doesn't know that. And so I think
important to share with the board. Yeah.
And I think one way to address that question that you so articulately posed is to make them aware that they are already
mm-hmm.
influencing policy, to encourage them to do it more.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That they're already having that impact, and with just like a little bit more effort, they can have significantly more impact, right? And I imagine you're thinking about types of materials that you could develop for your researchers to make it easy for them.
Exactly. And just, it's because we are a nonprofit research organization with a board of trustees that is diverse. We always have to be really mindful about how our scientists are presenting their opinions and arguments and making sure that they are not representing, speaking on behalf of the organization. So any advice you have for that at some point, not necessarily now, would be really valuable.
I do, definitely, right? I work for a public institution of higher education that is funded by taxpayer dollars. We are not allowed to lobby, right? So how do you balance that where we're asked to provide our expert feedback on legislation?
Right.
Yeah. So definitely, whenever I testify, for example, in a hearing, I am required to, essentially say that the views that I will express are based off of my professional expertise and do not reflect the University of California and its Board of Regents.
Okay.
Yeah. But we should chat more. Please shoot me an email.
Okay, will do. Thanks, Brandie.
You're welcome. Okay, good. I see some coming into the chat. Okay, Alyssa, how can we effectively address privacy and security challenges of AI while optimizing positive societal impact? Ooh, I like that. Where is Alyssa? Alyssa, do you want to talk about it? Because as I read it, I see a tension that you're posing between privacy and security and positive societal impact.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So there is usually a trade-off between addressing privacy and security, but also basically not limiting innovation as well if we were to extend the number of challenges, I guess, that would come with it. And so, yeah, like policy has a big role to play in incentivizing addressing privacy and security challenges because businesses on their own do not always prioritize that above their profit-seeking goals or other, business priorities. And so it's sort of it is a policy's responsibility to help balance the positive societal impact and potential negative impacts that the technology and innovation may bring.
Yeah, this is a really good example, especially as we have data protection laws where people can opt out of the use of their data in models. Unfortunately, that could mean, if a certain group decides like they don't want to share their data, the model then will not be reflective of their lived experience and their unique data, which is a challenge. So I really like this question. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit more. Who do you think are your biggest power players?
In policy?
Well, around answering this policy problem.
Yeah, this is a good question. Yes, the type of research I do is actually user research. So that is why I'm, I guess, attending a workshop on policy communications because it is a challenge for me, and I have not the easiest time identifying the right players in this space. I know that there are like regulations that EU is working on, and then US is not working as actively on it. I feel like it's more of a theater than the actual intention to put in place regulations anytime soon before US has gained advantage in the market around this topic. But I know that California and Gavin Newsom just passed like a thing around it, but that would be the hardest to reach. I know that there are some senators who are interested in developing some sort of plan and adding it to their agenda, and that would be probably a bit easier to reach. I know that there are hearings also on the topic, and there are some colleagues that testify, for example. And so that could be an avenue for putting forward some of the ideas for addressing that challenge.
Yeah, those are great opportunities. I think also not just thinking about people who sit in a policy position, but also the companies themselves. I do know that there's been some work on the use of like differential privacy for people to be able to like say, I want this amount of noise added into my data so that you don't have my personally identifiable information, and I'm willing to receive because of that lesser product, or a product that's not going to perform as optimally if I would have given you all of my data. And the companies, right, there are privacy laws like in California, and laws around security vulnerabilities. So that's good.
Yeah, there are also, I guess, nonprofits and think tanks that could be maybe having a closer relationship with some of the policymakers, since they could be trusted. They could have trusted existing relationships they could leverage.
Yeah, exactly.
And
then you would need to think about, map that out, and then you map out, okay, these are my power players. Let's say it's this think tank. What are their goals? What's their mission? Essentially, like, what actions can they take on my behalf to make me more effective?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I see two more came in. Katie, how can we more equitably support local climate resilience planning, particularly for extreme flooding? That is such an important question, and one that's really hard to get people to act on.
Yeah, I'm actually, so I'm in the middle of writing a day one memo on this already, and so I'm like trying not to do the solutioning, and I probably need to like cut a bunch out of what I have. But the problem is actually more, well, I guess more specifically to do with lack of access to third-party climate models. So that's like where the like plan of action comes in, and so I'm wondering if I need to kind of step back in the beginning of this memo to like not dive right into climate models, or if that's okay.
It is okay. I think it is okay, right? A lot of you have been thinking about your policy problem for a really long time. You've done your research, you've engaged with the different power players. So to me, it sounds like you've already done a lot of this background work, and that you're pretty certain that this is one of the strategies that can be effective at addressing your policy problem. So I encourage you to run with it.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, and the last one, how can we equitably increase public participation in online citizen science projects? I like that one, Sarah. Do you want to talk about it a little bit more?
I'll just say, as like a fundamental science researcher, this was a hard problem because the things that we study are sort of so far from policy. But one of the things that we do is to work with an online citizen science game. And there's been some work from OSTP that's identified public participation in the bioeconomy as sort of an important goal to reach. And I think, I'm not quite sure what angle to come at this from, but I think there's sort of like some funding policy related advocacy that could happen around how these projects are always like add-ons to basic science research grants, and there's no infrastructure to support like long-term development and evaluation. And yeah, maybe there's some public facing sort of memos that could be written as well. I'm not really sure. This is very new.
I think this is definitely a challenge, and we do see these like public participation activities, and then what happens after the end of the research, and how is it shared and continued over time. Now, for those federal agencies that are providing the grants, I think they have an obligation. I mean, they're one of the biggest power players in this space, and that, for example, NSF and NIH, our data has to be shared with them, and then it's put into this large database. So definitely, I think connecting with them to say, well, what are the ways that the agency can further support these public participation activities over the long term. Right, just as they've done of ensuring that any data that is funded through federal funding is provided to continue to assist research in that area over time. Great. Thank you all so much for participating and sharing your ideas with others. Now, here are some slides that are just the reminders for you, like who are your power players, right? You want to think about the people who experience your problem, those people whose buy-in you need, experts with deep factual knowledge. Think about the decision makers, the buyers and payers, so saboteurs and influencers. And you'll be using that as you go into your breakout groups here in a few minutes. Here you can actually click on there to submit to the Day One project. The Day One submission, they require the following information in your submission, just the basic gist of your idea, including research or data that supports your course of action, what that pressing issue society is facing is, and your idea, how it would solve it, and why is now the time to solve that issue. If you check out our workshop 2, Eric Martin from the Federation of American Scientists, the Day One Project, talked about the big importance of timing, right? Is there a bill that's being proposed? Is there a hearing that we can actually hit this issue on right now? And then they use the term customer in theirs, but I call them power players. So I would say, like, who are the power players for your idea and what steps do they need to take to implement your solution? How do you make it so easy for them that they will just want to act on your solution? And what becomes possible if your idea is successfully and fully implemented? So we will share this information with you in your breakout rooms. So in your breakout room, and we'll probably take maybe like just a 5-minute bio break here after I'm done with this, and then come back together. In the breakout room activity, try to draft out your policy problem. Remember, like, your adjective, like more effectively, efficiently, and achieve what? What are you trying to do? Then think about who are your power players around that policy problem, and what should your policy memo advocate for? Remember, bottom line up front, get to the point right at the beginning. And here are the requirements for the Day One submission. So with that, let's just take about a 5-minute bio break and come back at about 11:08, and then we'll put you into breakout rooms to work on your proposals. Okay, so I'll find Mariana in her breakout room. So you will now be going into your breakout rooms. I will share in each of the breakout rooms the slide deck so that you will have it there and can review it with each other, especially the slide on the breakout room activity. And I think we have how many? 7 of you. So we'll do a group of 4 and a group of 3. You'll be randomly placed into your breakout rooms. Thank you so much, Emily, for helping me get these breakout rooms. Oh, no, we have 8, 4 and 4. Okay, so let's have you go to your breakout rooms now, and I will go to one first, and then I'll see you in the other one. All right. During the workshop today, we learned about different types of impactful policy deliverables, how to frame your policy problem, and to think through those power players. The Federation of American Scientists and their Day One project, they are looking for submissions for ideas that will be translated into a policy memo, which, as a reminder, is a very short, 1 to 2 pages, bottom line up front. What do you need to do? What does that power player need to do? How do they do it with actionable, goal-oriented, measurable outcomes? So on the slide deck, you can actually click here to submit. I want to go over this process with all of you very quickly. As was mentioned in workshop 2, unfortunately, it says apply for this position rather than just submit your idea, but you would click on that, apply for the position. In preparing for your submission, you need to think through the basic gist of your idea, any supporting research or data that can support your course of action that you are recommending in your policy memo. I will also emphasize that the Federation of American Scientists and their team, they will help you identify additional power players and deliverables that can be effective at achieving your policy goal. Right. Many of them have worked extensively with federal and state government, industry, academia. So they have a pretty strong grasp of who the different power players are across a wide variety of science and technology issues, and they can help you refine your idea. Next is thinking about that pressing issue that society is facing and that your idea would solve. Again, why is now the time? Right? Why is now an opportunity for you in your research and all the work that you've done and the solution that you've come up with? Now is the time to act on it. And who the recipient is, that power player or customer for your idea. Who are you looking to convince? And what steps can they take? Remember, tangible steps, measurable, to implement your solution. And last, what becomes possible if your idea is successfully and fully implemented, right? This is what's the what of doing this? Why does it matter? What kind of impact are we going to have? So once you do that, and I recommend drafting all of this before you go to apply for position, put in your information. And here you can just copy paste in your response. If you could say referral from, CITRIS, the CITRIS Policy Lab. We would be grateful for that. We'd get nothing from that, but it's nice for them to know that we are also engaged in this process and helping to support them. And then you can submit your application. It's a pretty light lift. And again, they have team members who will help you draft your policy memo. And a reminder to everybody, the last workshop of our 4-part workshop series will be on Friday, November 15th, engaging with legislative and regulatory processes. So this includes commenting on draft bills, legislation, also providing comments to federal and state agencies in response to requests for comment or requests for information. And we hope that you will join us for that final workshop so you can be more effective at making sure your research is getting into the hands of decision makers and that they can act on it. So thank you all so much for joining us for workshop 3, pitching the president. And we look forward to seeing you in workshop 4.